Hey, this is RockMan. Welcome back to RockMan Reads a Freakin Book, where DK left off. Today I'll be reading chapters 42 through 44 of I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 42. We left off on a cliffhanger. My grandfather! I stared at Elagos, gape-mouthed. You're not referring to Rostak Horn, are you? The Kamasi shook his head and pointed me toward one of the suite's chairs. You inquired if I could be trusted several hours ago, and you informed me of a decision that requires I keep your trust, or you will be hurt and perhaps even killed. I offer you now something of similar value. I slowly sat. Highlights skittered silver over his gold down as he drew himself together in the middle of the room. I sensed a great solemnity about him, and knew what he was about to do was not something he did lightly. Elagos, you need not tell me anything that will jeopardize you or your people. In fact, it might be best if you don't. No, I know I can trust you. The Kamasi gave me a beneficent smile. Even under pain of death, you would not surrender this secret. Not knowing what to say, I just sat back and let my bandaged hands lie on my belly. You will recall I told you that memories of momentous events become strong and almost tangible to us. I nodded. Killing someone would create such a memory. Correct, or other things like the birth of a child, or meeting someone famous, or being present at some significant event. Elagos' expression softened slightly. Among the Kamasi, we refer to these memories as memni. They are memories invested with emotion and sensory data, and even sometimes intangible things that escape quantification. They are more fine in detail than any holograph, and more precious to us than any material possession. He brushed his fingertips lightly across the purple striping on his shoulders and around his eyes. The truly significant thing about memni is that we can share them with others. The ability to transfer them is limited by consanguinity, which is why our clans often intermarry, making certain there are open avenues of communication between groups. Because we can share these memories, because they come across with full impact, they have more completely allowed us to communicate within our species. This is why we have avoided violence and look to help others find peace. My markings are common among the Kla, the maternal clan into which I was born. It is fairly easy for me to transfer a memnus to another member of the Kla clan, or to my father's clan, the A clan. My head came up. My grandfather knew a Kamasi named Yelnek Itkla. My mother's brother. We shared the maternal line. I knew him well, and we were very proud of his being a Jedi. Elagos' face took on a very happy expression. You must understand, we Kamasi discovered something special about the Jedi. While only 3 or 4 generations of separations could all but block the transfer of memni between Kamasi, when one of us came to know a Jedi and form a bond with him, we could transfer to him a memnus. This is nothing short of a miracle, and when my uncle became a Jedi, the Claw clan's pride swelled incredibly. It is through a memnus my uncle gave to me that I recognized you. You have Najah's eyes, his scent, and his sense. Your uncle was Yelnik? Where is he? Can he tell me more about Najah? Elagos blinked his eyes rapidly and covered his face with his hands for a second. I started to get out of my chair, but he held a hand out to stop me, then composed himself. Forgive me, my uncle was not on Kamas when our world was immolated. He was visiting a friend on Alderaan, and convinced that friend to provide a safe haven for other Kamasi survivors. He and others of our leaders who had survived decided that we also had to spread out and to mix our clans in all these new settlements. While Alderaan might be the largest settlement, it would not be the only one. I felt my blood run cold. He died on Alderaan? Elagos nodded slowly. He had eluded the Emperor's Jedi hunters for years, but he could not elude a world's destruction. What was the memory of my grandfather he gave to you? Can you give it to me? Elagos shook his head. I do not think you are quite enough a Jedi, nor enough of a friend, for us to be able to do this yet. He hesitated. And I am not certain you would want this memory. It is of your grandfather's death. I sank back into my chair and closed my eyes. What I knew of my grandfather's death was a nightmare. but at least I could treat it like a dream. I didn't want to even think about getting it full blown with emotion from my grandfather's friend. You're right, perhaps that's not a memory to which I am entitled. Yet. I nodded and opened my eyes again. Yet? We shall have to remedy that then. The Kamasi smiled again, slowly this time, giving him just a hint of predator. How will we proceed? I brushed a bandaged hand over my mouth. Every good operation starts with intelligence. The Invids draw ships and crews from all over, but those based here are definitely the spine of Tavira's operation. If we shatter them and drive them away, she'll have to take greater and greater risks, which means she'll make mistakes. Destroying a planet of pirates is a tall order for a lone Jedi and a lightsaber. True, especially since I don't have a lightsaber. I frowned. Don't think I can download the plans for one from the HoloNet, and I don't think sending Luke Skywalker a message inquiring after how to build one will bring a favorable response. Even on Karalit, we had heard of his Jedi Academy. He would not teach you? I winced. I was there, but didn't exactly leave on the best of terms with him. Do the Kamasi have the equivalent of the Corellian strafing the spaceport you've just left? Uprooting a plant after you have plucked a single blossom? It works. Can't be a Jedi without a lightsaber. Eligo shrugged. Perhaps you can reroot the plant. Something in the back of my brain clicked. Not reroot, just grow a new one. I got up and jogged into my bedroom. There on a night table I had a data pad and a stack of data card journals. I picked them up and started sorting them clumsily by pitching the ones I didn't want onto the bed. Finally I got down to the ones I needed and handed them to Eligos. He frowned. Corellian horticultural digests? I nodded. Najah's best friend, the man I grew up thinking of as my grandfather, the man who is my grandfather, was wise enough to know I'd need the sort of information I'd declined to take with me. These journals have in them columns he has written. I thought he gave them to me when I was leaving because he wanted to share his work with me, but I never even got all the way through any of them. Too much plant stuff and annotations that reference the genetic codes of the hybrids. In those codes, he has encrypted Najah's journals and teachings, and the instructions for creating a lightsaber have got to be in there. Eligo scooped the datapad up. If you'll permit me, I will go through these journals and see what I can find. Good, I held my hands up. Since I can't fly for a bit, I have ample reasons for wandering around about all over the place. I know a lot about operations here, but not as much as I should. Once I know where the support structures are for the Invid organization, I can take them apart. It won't be easy, but it's got to be done. As my uncle often said, there are attempts and there are accomplishments. History's only praise one. So in other words, do or do not, there is no try. I laughed and clapped my hands, then bit back the pain. You accomplish some decoding and I'll accomplish some healing, then we'll go from there. I actually managed to do a lot during the time I was healing, and my imminent elevation to Tavira's side helped me immeasurably. When I was asked, for example, why I didn't use the Bacta tanks on Corcus to speed my healing, I said Tavira would think me weak if I could not endure the pain. That satisfied most folks, while the Jedi healing techniques Eligos uncovered from the journals actually allowed me to speed my healing. I knew, however, that having my hands continually wrapped in bandages would be helpful, since it made me decidedly less threatening to most folks. I made the rounds of the myriad group stationed on Corcus, and was greeted warmly by all the various leaders. They clearly felt courting me would be good for them in the long run. I spent some time in the Warren with Rystar's raiders and the Red Nova crew. Aside from wanton cruelty visited on the Indigs, they were a fairly benign bunch of individuals. They were not quite the hard cases that the survivors were, and really didn't seem to have any secrets or plotting going on that I could exploit. In direct contrast, Shala the Hutt and his gang of Glitbiters were malevolent to the core. They'd taken over a warehouse out near the spaceport and had remodeled it in a fashion best described as Old Republic because it looked as if the place had been destroyed before the Empire arose and left virtually untouched since. Debris tangled the place, with rusty orange being the dominant color and laser burn black being a second one. Duraplast crates that looked worn enough to be Death Star debris were scattered all over, and the whole place stank of rotting vegetation. The Duracrete slab in the center had been laced down into an amphitheater with a flattened dais at the north end where Shala spread himself out. I've heard it said that young Hutts can be quite muscular and powerful, which must mean that Shala is older than dirt. If a rock could be described as obese and it drooled, that would be Shala. Shala tended to mumble a lot, then laugh, which made his cronies laugh too. The 3PO droid he had translating for him did a fairly good job, but Shala hit him so often to correct him that the droid's right arm looked like it had been dragged behind a speeder bike going at a high speed through Vlarna's narrow streets. I smiled at the droid. Tell your master I find his hospitality most generous, but an allergy to most insects means I'll have to decline snacking on those crunch bugs. I nodded to Shala and passed the bowl of chirping bugs back to him, licking my lips enviously. I turned my attention back to watching two little mammals with tusks trying to tear each other to pieces. They fought hard, apparently not knowing Shala would eat the victor. The most interesting thing about Shala's warehouse was that the building was actually smaller on the inside than it was on the outside. The absolute glut of junk in the place made it difficult to tell that fact from the inside, and I would have missed it save for spreading my senses out to see if he had hidden guards located in various spots where they could snipe at interlopers. I didn't find any at the time, but I did discover people working behind false walls and in other sunken pits buried beneath piles of scrap metal and plasteel. I smiled and gently flicked away a droplet of Tusket blood that hit my right cheek. The victorious Tusket screamed as Shala snapped its spine and bit its head off. He offered me a raw haunch, but I declined, so he tossed it to another of the warehouse's denizens, and a fight ensued for it. I sincerely hoped for the sake of the Rodian who won the prize that Shala would be sated by Tusket, lest another victor end up on the evening's menu. By far the most secretive of the groups in Vlarna was the Black Star Pirates. While they made a cantina called the Minok Hole their home, most of them passed through it on their way to another location. Way off in the back of the common room, in a corner where visitors never got seated, members would punch a code into a keypad and be admitted beyond a sliding door fitted into the wall. I had no idea what went on back there, though the relief of pirates allowed to leave their public station and retreat to the back radiated off them like heat off a fusion reactor. While collecting data, I did my best to limit my uses of the Force. I wanted to avoid detection, of course, but I also wanted to avoid having things that seemed anomalous happening before I started taking overt action. The fact was that the easiest solution to dealing with the Invids was to put together a lightsaber and harvest a bunch of heads. Decapping the pirates would certainly cause a quickening of the Invids' downfall, but then I'd be the only one left on Corcus, which would provide Tavira with a big clue as to which one of us was the source of her problems. Even more of a problem than that, of course, was the fact that I'd be committing wholesale murder. While it was true that none of these folks would ever be elected Humanitarian of the Year, they didn't all deserve death. Kate and Timzer, for example, were just good pilots who had fallen in with the Invids. Had they joined the rebellion, they could have been plotting Tavira's downfall. I wanted to give them a chance to redeem themselves, I guess, which meant I needed to convince them that what they were doing was wrong and to walk, run, slither, or fly away from it. In this I had an invisible ally. All my targets were spacers. Something about traveling through the vastness of space, never knowing if a jump will go bad, dropping you into a sun or leaving you stuck in hyperspace forever, that makes spacers a bit superstitious. For years I'd worn a Jedi medallion as a good luck charm. I'd infiltrated the Invids because I read an omen in a dream. If enough things began to go wrong, if there were enough signs of impending doom, even the hardcore Invids would begin looking elsewhere for planets to plunder and places to stay. In all of the places I went, I did my best to memorize what I could. Knowing as much as possible about various layouts was vital if I was to slip in and slip out again. The game I was going to play was very dangerous, but it was one that I had to win, so I did everything I could to control all the variables. After a week, I had enough information to start planning my campaign. I laid everything out, figured who I would hit first and how, then where I would move next. I had to hit hard to keep the pressure on, yet I had to strike at random so I could not be anticipated and trapped. It wasn't going to be easy, but then if it was, it wouldn't have been a job for a Jedi. Only one last thing needed to be accomplished before I could begin. I needed a lightsaber. Eligos uncovered my grandfather's instructions on how to create a lightsaber fairly early on, and my heart almost sank. The data file was rather specific about the various supplies that would be needed to create the weapon, so I had a shopping list. Beyond that, however, the file detailed the steps needed to put the weapon together and included the various meditations and exercises a Jedi apprentice should go through with each step along the way. The process Najah laid out, if followed precisely, would take almost a month, and I didn't have a month. Oh, really? How many months has it been so far? I knew impatient... Well, that's right, because Tavira's coming back in a month. I knew impatience and haste were part of the dark side, but really hoped things could be truncated so I could actually succeed in my task. I took the first step by collecting the various parts. The lightsaber, while an elegant and deadly weapon, actually was not that complex. Getting the parts to put one together was not difficult at all. To serve as the hilt, for example, I salvaged the throttle assembly and handlebar tube from a junked speeder bike. I took it from where the wreck hung in the crash cantina, and no one so much as noticed me make off with it. I got the dimetrous circuitry for the activation loop from an old capital ship grade ion cannon fire initiation controller. Won that piece of junk from Shala betting on another Tuscat fight. The recharger port and wiring came from a comlink. I milled down Tri-Fighter laser flashback suppressor. Well, this is a mouthful of technobabble. Let's try that again. A milled down Tri-Fighter laser flashback suppressor became the parabolic high-energy flux aperture to stabilize the blade, and I pulled the dynaric laser feed line from the same broken laser cannon to act as the superconductor for energy transference from the power cell to the blade. Buttons and switches were easy to find, and dear old Admiral Tavira, with her gift of the brandy decanter and snifters, provided me all the jewels I needed to make a half-dozen lightsabers. The most difficult part of creating a lightsaber was producing the power cell that stored and discharged the amount of energy necessary to energize a lightsaber blade. That said, the parts list called for a pretty basic power cell. In fact, because of the age of the instructions, I had a hard time locating one that ancient. Newer power cells were more efficient than the one my grandfather had specified, but I didn't think that would present a problem. After all, as I read the instructions, I came to realize that the nature of the battery was not as important as how it was integrated with the rest of the components. The core of the Jedi ritual for creating a lightsaber came down to charging the power cell for the first time. My grandfather ridiculed the popular superstition stating a Jedi channeled the Force through his lightsaber. He suggested that this was a misunderstanding of what it took to charge it initially and tie it to the rest of the weapon. The Jedi, carefully manipulating the Force, bound the components together, linking them on something more than a mechanical or material level, so they worked with unimagined efficiency. Without this careful seasoning and conditioning of the lightsaber, the blade would be flawed and it would fail the Jedi. Before I could figure out how to put Tavira off for another month, Eligos decoded an annotation to the instructions for constructing lightsabers. It turned out that during the Clone Wars, Jedi Masters developed a way to create a lightsaber in 2 days. The Jah included this method, noting it was to be used only in times of pressing need, but not in haste. I read it over and felt a certain peace settle upon me. I knew the words had not been written for me, but they sank deep into my core. Urgency without panic. Action without thoughtlessness. I began by calming myself and simplifying my lifestyle. I drank only water and ate noodles that were all but unflavored. I cleared Tavira's gifts from my bedroom, or hid them away in closets. I sat in the middle of the floor with the parts for the blade laid out in a semicircle around me. I studied each one and used the Force to unfold it and take a sense of it into myself. My hands would fit the pieces together, but I wanted the parts to mesh as if they had been grown together. The lightsaber would be more than just a jumble of hardware, and to make it I had to see the parts as belonging together. I fitted the activation button into its place on the handlebar shaft and snapped the connectors into the right spots on the dimetrous circuit board. I worked that into the shaft itself, then inserted a strip of shielding to protect it from even the slightest leakage from the superconductor. Next, I snapped into place the gemstones I was using to focus and define the blade. At the center, to work as my continuous energy lens, I used the Durand fire. That same stone gave my grandfather's blade its distinctive silver sheen. I used a diamond and an emerald in the other 2 slots. I wasn't certain what I would get in the way of color tints from the emerald, and with the diamond I hoped for a coruscation effect. Onto the end of the hilt where the blade would appear, I screwed the high-energy flux aperture. It would carry a negative charge which would stabilize the positively charged blade and provide it a solid base without allowing it to eat its way back through to my hands. Controlling a lightsaber blade was difficult enough without having it nibbling away at fingers. I clipped the discharged energy cell in place, then connected the leads to the recharging socket. I screwed the recharging socket into the bottom of the hilt, but didn't fasten on the handlebar's original butt cap that would protect it because I needed to charge the power cell for the very first time. So all this time, like a Jedi's lightsabers actually periodically need charging, like a cell phone. Is that correct? So during the movies, we just happen to not see, Obi-Wan or Luke just plugging their lightsaber into a charger overnight. I don't know how that works. I reached over and took the charging cord from the small transformer I'd borrowed from our tech bay and plugged the lightsaber in. With my finger poised on the transformer button that would start the energy flowing, I drew in a deep breath and lowered myself into a trance. I knew that manipulating matter sufficiently to meld the part and forge the weapon would have been all but impossible for anyone but a Jedi Master like Yoda, but doing just that as a part of the construction of a lightsaber had been studied and ritualized so even a student could manage it. It was very much a lost art, a link to a past that had been all but wiped out, and by performing it I completed my inheritance of my Jedi legacy. I hit the button, allowing the slow trickle of energy to fill the battery. I opened myself to the Force, and with the hand I had touching the lightsaber's hilt, I bathed the lightsaber with the Force. As I did so, subtle transformations took place in the weapon. Elemental bonds shifted, allowing more and more energy to flow into the cell and throughout the weapon. I was not certain how the changes were being made, but I knew that at the same time as they were being made in the lightsaber, they were being made in me as well. In becoming a conduit for the Force for this purpose, the final integration of the people I'd been occurred. The fusion became the person I would be forever after. I was still a pilot, a little bit arrogant, with a healthy ego and a willingness to tackle difficult missions. I was still Corsac, an investigator and a buffer between the innocents in the galaxy and the slime that would consume them. And I was Jedi. I was heir to a tradition that extended back tens of thousands of years. Jedi had been the foundation of stability in the galaxy. They had always opposed those who reveled in evil and sought power for the sake of power. People like Exar Kun and Palpatine, Darth Vader and Thrawn, Izzard and Tavira. These were the plagues on society that the Jedi cured. In the absence of the Jedi, evil thrived. In the presence of just one Jedi, evil evaporated. Just as with the lightsaber, the changes being made in me were not without costs. What the Force allowed me to do also conferred upon me great burdens. To act without forethought and due deliberation was no longer possible. I had to be very certain of what I was doing, for a single misstep could be a disaster. While I knew I would make mistakes, I had to do everything I could to minimize their impact. It was not enough to do the greatest good for the greatest number. I had to do the best for everyone. There was no walking away from the new responsibility I accepted. Like my grandfather, I might well choose when and where to reveal who and what I was, but there was no forgetting, no leaving that responsibility at the office. My commitment to others had to be total and complete. I was an agent of life every day, every hour, every second, for as long as I lived and then some. I heard a click and looked up, blinking my eyes. Eligos? Eligos stood over me, offering me a glass of water. It's done. I blinked, then took the water and greedily sucked it down. I lowered the glass and felt water dribbling down my goatee. I swiped at it with my right hand and felt the stubble of beard on my cheeks. How long? 2.5 days. The Kamasi smiled and took the glass from me. Not as fast as your grandfather, but acceptable. Anyone notice I was missing? Several people inquired, but I told them you were down with the brandy ague. They said they could understand you're celebrating your change in fortune. He set the glass on my dresser, then walked back into the suite's parlor. While you were engaged in here, I found something else to do and made good use of one of Tavira's gifts to you. I estimated the pattern based on my memness of your grandfather. He held up a green Jedi robe with a black belt and black overrobe. I think it should fit you well. I nodded and brandished the lightsaber. I punched the button under my thumb, giving birth to the silver blade, 133 centimeters in length. A lightsaber and robes. Looks like a little justice has arrived on Corcus, and it's about time. Obviously, some really cool things in that chapter. Obviously, really important that he, by going through the ceremony of making the lightsaber, it seems like he's become a full-fledged Jedi in his mind. I also enjoy how he's carefully planning and plotting what's going to happen in these next chapters here. Chapter 43. I decided to build upon the excuse Eligos had fashioned for me by spending more time drinking, or at least appearing to be drunk. A little Savarine brandy spilled on a tunic will leave you reeking of the stuff, and if you keep swirling around and are sloppy when you drink it, spilling more on yourself in the process, folks notice. The people I was spending my time around had no trouble believing I was 3 jumps from sober at all times. Being drunk gave me far more freedom because as long as I was not obnoxious, lost at sabacc, and was generous with Tavira's money or gifts, I was everyone's friend. People looked forward to seeing me, found it easy to ignore me, and even treated me as if I was not there on those occasions when I feigned sleep. I chose the survivors as my first targets. I knew them better than I knew anyone else, so I had an edge on getting into their minds. The survivors were also the most disciplined of the invids, so if I could break them, make them skittish, the nervousness would bleed over into the other groups. My move against them would be the prelude to my attacks on the other groups, so I wanted it to be especially chilling. Eligos and I worked hard on it, programming it into my data pad, then projecting it out of the holoprojector pad in my suite. We ran over it again and again, allowing me to memorize it from every angle and practice my part in it. I had to be careful and quick, but if it worked right, I would shake the survivors to their core. I took a seat in the crash cantina at a table very much in the back. Captain Niv normally sat there, and not too long afterward he joined me. Jacob had not been paying me court as had the other pirate leaders. He trusted in the friendship we had built up during the time he commanded my squadron. I actually liked him and the way he'd managed the survivors, but from the conversations we'd had, I knew he was not wholly comfortable with all he had done in his life. That confidence, expressed to me late one night, was about to come back and haunt him. Jacob sat with his back to the corner of the room. I sat at his left with my back toward a wall, but slightly exposed along my flank. Another chair sat across from him and could not be seen by most of the rest of the room because of a pillar. I had a bottle of Savarine brandy sitting in front of me and a snifter in my right hand. Jacob drank lum, but never enough to get roaring drunk, just mildly suggestible. We sat there chatting in low voices about the latest rumors concerning Shala the Hutt, when I pushed the empty chair out with my left foot as if something were drawing it back to sit. I tapped the force, letting it fill me, but turned my head toward the chair and away from Jacob. "You can't sit here. This is a private table." As I said that, I reached out with my senses and projected an image into Jacob's brain. Jacob's head came up and he blanched. Not possible. The figure he saw sitting down opposite him spat out a thick golden credit coin that bounced once on the table. My left hand swept out to grab it. Then I slapped down the credit I'd palmed. My left hand recoiled. It's cold. The figure across the table from Jacob wore an Imperial captain's uniform, albeit a bit too small, and had a mouse under his left eye. In fact, Captain Zlis Unar of the Crusader looked exactly the way he had after the survivors had tried him and Jacob had ordered his execution. Jacob himself had stuffed the gold credit in his mouth, following the old superstition of buying off the evil things the dead would say about the living, then had him pitched out of the backstab's main airlock. Zlis Unar looked directly into Niv's eyes. "You can have your gold back. The dead don't speak ill of the dead." I grabbed Jacob's left wrist with my right hand. "What does he mean?" Jacob's mouth hung open. "I don't know." Zlis nodded slowly. You know. You know you should have died the day all your friends did. If you'd fought harder, they might have lived. You failed them, and now you will join them. Doom is coming to Corcus. All your victims will be avenged." Jacob stood abruptly, tearing his wrist from my grip, and threw his mug of loam through the phantasm. I let the image fade into a bloody mist that drifted away as the mug shattered against the pillar. Jacob stood there, gape-jawed and trembling, then looked around at everyone else in the cantina. Their attention had been drawn to him when the mug exploded, but they had seen nothing prior to that. Jacob pointed at the chair. "Did you see him?" Other people started to shake their heads. He looked at me. "You saw him, didn't you, Genos? You saw him." I shuddered and drained my brandy snifter. "I saw him. He was that guy we took, the one we tried." I fingered the coin. "You put this in his mouth." Jacob snatched the coin from my grip and held it aloft. "Right, I put this in his mouth." "But we left him in space." I poured more brandy into my snifter and looked up at Jacob, ignoring the tightening knot of people closing in on us. "What did he mean, Doom is coming to Corcus?" Jacob snatched my brandy away from me and swallowed it all in one gulp. "I don't know." He put the snifter down again and tapped the rim for a refill. "I don't know, but it is not good. Not good at all." Within 12 hours, the story of the visitation had spread all over Vlarna and had taken on a life of its own. I had people tell me I had people tell me what they had seen, and got to listen to them describing a vision I know they never saw. Even when I said that was different from what I'd seen, they told me I was misremembering because I'd been drunk at the time. They knew what the truth was, and it really seemed to scare the bone right out of their spines. No one was quite certain what it was they'd seen. Some thought it was a ghost, pure and simple, come back to haunt Niv for killing him. Others took the warning into account and wondered why a ghost would warn when he could have just struck and killed us all, if a ghost could actually do that. The warning seemed to worm its way into the minds of many, which was my intent. I wanted them to have been warned, so that when things started to happen, they would link them back to the warning. I was pleased the first effort had so grand an effect, but I knew I couldn't do that sort of thing again. While I might be able to use an illusion to throw off pursuit, simple ghostly comings and goings were not going to convince the Invids that it was time to abandon Tavira. The palmed coin provided solid evidence that convinced a lot of people of the veracity of the visitation. Because of that, I decided that the next actions I took required physical proof of something going on, and a coin wasn't going to do it. It was time for something a bit more direct and painful. I waited until after Timzer and Kate had dragged me home from Crash and turned me over to Elagos before acting. Mumbling how he hoped I wouldn't vomit on the bedsheets again, the Kamasi hustled me off, and the two of them escaped lest they be asked to help clean me up. Once they were away, I slipped into my Jedi uniform, donned a hooded cloak, and slipped out into the night. Using the Force, I was able to blank the short-term memory of those hotel staffers who did see me, leaving them with an innocent 8-second gap in their memories that covered my passage through the lobby. Using the Force, both in Crash and in the lobby, was taking a risk at detection by Tavira's advisors, but I was fairly certain there were none in Corcus. She'd never given us one before, and she had no reason to assume there was going to be a problem on Corcus. To leave one here just in case would be to provide any of these groups with a chance to learn her secret and strike out on their own. For that reason alone, I felt very safe in using the Force as I hunted. My previous sojourns into the city served me well, as I moved through the less populated alleys and byways to reach some of the seedier areas of the aviary. I reached inside to tap the Force so I could expand my sphere of responsibility and locate someone who needed help. My intention, of course, was to help that person and take the criminals involved out of the holograph. It was like being back in Corsac, making a sweep through Treasure Ship Row, just without all the lights. The difference was this time I had the Force as my ally. My sense of the city and the area around me became very acute, allowing me to register the various life sources. Had I wanted to, I could have taken a census of crunch bugs or feral tuskettes in seconds. I didn't, though. Other data drew me on into the night. When on patrol for Corsac, I'd been a predator looking for prey, hoping I didn't find it in sufficient quantity to kill me. With the Force, I almost felt like a super predator. I sensed where everyone was, where their intention was directed. I could choose paths of confrontation that would keep things quiet, or would make for a big display. At the moment I chose something smaller and more intimate, but I knew the day for something more spectacular would come soon. Even though I sensed where the three of them were, I heard her sobs before I ever saw them. Two drunken laser lords had trapped an Indig woman between them and hustled her into an alley. They backed her up against a wall, trapping her hands high above her head and recovering her face and neck with the sort of sloppy kisses the totally inebriated seemed to have mastered. Except for the look of terror on her face, their antics might have seemed comical. I moved into the alley as silent as a shadow and grabbed the first man by the scruff of the neck. I whirled him over toward the right across my body and smashed his face into the opposite alley wall. Something crunched when he hit, then he slumped to the ground. A half step forward and I brought the pommel of my lightsaber up in my right hand, catching the second man with an uppercut. Impact with the heavy metal pommel cap shattered the man's jaw and sent him reeling backward. One hand went to his mouth and the other dug for the blaster holstered on his right hip. As he started to draw the weapon, I rotated the lightsaber's hilt in my hand and ignited the silver blade. Its explosive hiss filled the alley, with the light painting the laser lord's shadow across the alley floor and up against the back wall. I arced the blade down, catching the rising blaster at barrel and grip, dropping pieces of it and two of his fingers to the ground. A side kick to his already broken jaw dropped him to the alley floor. Then I spun and lunged at his rising partner. Before he could draw his blaster, my lightsaber stabbed through his shoulder, burning a very neat, button-sized hole through bone and flesh. The oily stink of overcooked meat filled the alley. His face went absolutely white. He stared down at the silvery energy shaft sticking out of his shoulder, then his eyes rolled up into his head and he fainted. I snapped the blade off before his falling body could tear itself free of the blade. I didn't want him dead. I wanted neither of them dead. 2 dead men would be statistics, but these men would have scars and would tell a wonderful tale. What the visitation had begun, these 2 would continue. I turned to the woman who cowered in a crouch. I extended a hand to her and she took it. The tremors in her flesh matched the waves of terror radiating out from her. I made my voice even and as reassuring as I could. You have nothing to fear, child. They will not harm you any more. Who are you? I guided her to her feet and walked with her toward the alley mouth and the street light slanting into it. It is enough that I am known to be here. I let her walk into the light, but I remained in the shadows as I let her go. Just tell them that doom has come to Corcus. Their victims will be avenged, and those who fear justice will never sleep securely here again. Then I projected into her mind an illusion of my fading into nothingness, while I slipped past her and moved further along the street. I shadowed her to make certain nothing else happened to her. Then, when she found safety, I returned to my home. The next morning, early, Timser and Kate came to my suite and insisted Eligos wake me. I emerged from my bedroom looking rumpled and bleary-eyed, then sobered at the serious expressions on their faces. What's happened? What's wrong? Kate growled, and Timser provided a good translation. 2 laser lords got badly mangled last night. Doom has come to Corcus, and it brought a lightsaber with it. He's like a superhero. Putting on his costume and going out in the middle of the night, looking for justice. And I love it. Chapter 44. The lightsaber made quite the impression on everyone. According to the 2 laser lords, the Jedi creature that had jumped them had been 2 meters plus tall and had congealed out of the night itself. The lightsaber became frozen lightning, and the Jedi's eyes glowed like the event horizons of binary black holes. He attacked them without provocation and promised to do the same to everyone on the planet. My plans, of course, were less ambitious, but the reports played well in the aviary. I heard a lot of hollow boasting about what this person or that would do if confronted by this Avenger. Others might be frightened, the line went, but the speaker was not. He'd tear the Avenger's head clean off, then someone else would offer yet a more terrible fate for the Avenger, and so on. Like the bidding at an auction gone mad, mob bravery carried everyone to the zenith of hyperbole. Then finally someone, me sometimes, other folks most often, would shiver and clutch at his gun hand as if he too had lost fingers. That simple gesture would quiet a group, and the mere mention of the word Jedi was enough to send all the braggarts back to their drinks and private fears. As a Corsac officer, I'd seen this sort of bravado before, and had seen it fade in the presence of a uniformed officer, but never had it risen to such heights, nor plunged to such depths. The Empire's effort to vilify and transform the Jedi into agents of terror worked to my benefit. If the Empire, which was bad enough, had feared the Jedi enough to wipe them out, then having a Jedi here preying on the Invids was about as bad as it could get. So bad, in fact, that the captains of the various groups in Vlarna offered a 10,000 credit reward for the Jedi's head, and I set out to make it higher, much higher. For the next several nights, I stalked and hit what I considered to be soft targets. Bands of pirates wandering the streets in search of trouble. Each encounter occurred differently. The fact that many of the pirates reinforced their courage with lots of lumber whiskey helped me immeasurably. Drunks have often seemed incredibly lucky, and in Vlarna they were as well, but all of their luck was bad. One evening I let a trio of the Fast Blast crew catch a glimpse of me ducking into an alley. I'd been drinking with them earlier and had talked up how a group could go hunting the Jedi and snag him, winning themselves that great reward. The Fast Blasters, 2 humans, male and female, and a male Kubaz, worked themselves up into a frenzy. Then I excused myself and made as if to head home. I wished them luck with their hunt, hoping they would find the Jedi before the other hunting groups, and they took the bait. The Fast Blasters came running, and as they rounded the corner of the alley, I projected into their minds the image of me fleeing before them, my cloak flapping back, water from a sewage rivulet splashing up with each step. The humans raced after me at full speed. The Kubaz, who didn't quite see the image I projected, slowed and raised a hand to warn his compatriots. Before he could do so, I rose from the shadows that concealed me near the alley mouth and clopped him on the head with the butt of my lightsaber. Bereft of his warning, his two companions ran at full sprint into the brick and plaster wall I'd hidden with my illusion. The woman rebounded hard from the wall, her blonde hair wrapped around her face as she twisted through the air and crashed down in a trash midden. The man, who had been a step behind her, had begun to twist to his right, so he took the impact on his shoulder. Even from 10 meters away, I heard his collarbone snap. He bounced back, took a couple of stumbling steps in my direction, then dropped to his knees. His right hand fumbled with the blaster holster beneath his left arm, but with his broken bone, there was no way he could get a hold of it. I stepped in closer and thumbed the lightsaber to life. His eyes grew wide and he sank back on his haunches. You've lost use of the arm. No reason to lose the whole thing, is there? He slowly shook his head. Very good. I brought the point of the blade around so it sat a centimeter from the tip of his flattened nose. The next fast blaster I see on the streets will die. Relay that message for me, will you? He nodded, and I stepped back away from him, retracting the lightsaber's blade. I turned to stalk back down the alley to the street. Even without the force, I would have heard the snap of his blaster being pulled from the holster. Already 3 meters away, I turned, lit my lightsaber, and deflected the first shot into the alley wall, where it left a little guttering flame. 2 more shots missed wide. I blocked a fourth to my left with the lightsaber, then saw the fifth would miss right and drill the Kubas struggling to his feet. I reached out with my right hand and blocked the bolt, sucking as much of the energy in as I could. The shot stung, sending a jolt up my arm, but I shunted the pain aside and funneled the spare energy into telekinesis. I closed my right hand into a fist, then pulled. I wrenched the blaster from his hand, snapping a couple of fingers as I went, then tossed it high onto a roof. Remember my message. I turned again, smacked the Kubas in the head again with the lightsaber's butt, and vanished into the night. 3 days later, the Fast Blast and its crew departed Corcus for destinations unknown. Other crews were not so easily frightened. The Black Star pirates felt invincible in their sanctuary behind the Minoc hold, and I knew my intervention there would shake them to their core. In an earlier visit as Genocidanian, I took a seat that gave me a clear vision of the datapad they used to gain entry into the back. By casually studying the people going in, I learned they use a 4-digit code, but most of the pirates hit the numbers too quickly for me to read them exactly. I waited for an older man well into his cups to approach the door and set myself. He punched the number in and waited for a light to go on and a tone to sound before he would be free to push the door open. I reached out with the force and simply made him forget he'd seen the light and heard the tone. He frowned, then more carefully and precisely punched the code in, letting me read from his actions what the combination was. A rainstorm hit Varna the evening I decided to carry my war to the Black Star pirates, and the atmospherics certainly added to the tension growing in the aviary. It also helped that virtually everyone wore hooded cloaks as sheets of rain lashed the city. I was soaked by the time I reached the Minoc hole, but went unnoticed among the other dripping, cloaked figures in the cantina. I even swept into the back area warded by pirates without being the subject of much scrutiny. Moving with authority and raising a hand to the datapad to punch in the combination appeared to be normal to the pirates seated there, so I only needed to devote a tiny slice of the force to making them lose the seconds of their life in which I passed them by. I punched in the code and pushed the door open. What I found beyond it surprised me because of the opulence. Muted red and gold glow panels gave the foyer and parlor beyond it a warm feel. Doorways across from the entry and in the 2 side walls provided access to corridors that I had guessed led to rooms meant for private pleasures. I caught just enough of the tang of spice in the air to guess what some of the pirates were enjoying, and a half-dozen men and women attired in unseasonably brief costume, lounging vivaciously on overstuffed furniture, suggested what others would find to content them. And through the doorway at the far end of the parlor, I heard the cheers and groans I'd long associated with gambling. With the small self-service bar to my right, the Black Star Pirates' haven seemed to make available most of the idle-time delights considered desirable throughout the galaxy. This was a place where everyone could have fun. To my left, a silver 3PO droid with a missing eye sketched a brief bow and extended his hands toward me. "Check your weapons, Master?" Beyond him I saw a small caged enclosure chock full of blasters of every size and description, with another 3PO droid locked in, shelving weapons and retrieving them. "I think not." "I must insist," the 3PO droid inclined his head toward me, "in accordance with all the regulations in your fellowship contract, specifically Clause 35.6, I lit the lightsaber and split him from crown to groin with one swipe." Sparks flew as both halves tottered and crashed to the floor. I stepped over the twittering pile of circuits, secretly guilty over how good that had felt. Then I pivoted to the right and slashed the lightsaber through the drink synthesizer. Coming around full circle, I leveled the silver blade at the parlor's occupants. That was last call. I think you want to leave now. I raised a finger to my lips, quietly. They scattered mutely as I stalked straight into the gambling den. People hunched over sabak tables missed me entirely, but those gathered around a Jubilee wheel did not. Jubilee wheel. Jubilee. I stabbed the argent lightsaber down into the wheel and left the wheel's momentum carve the rim from the hub. The rim spun off, wobbling around the table, scattering bets, then rolled to the floor and tangled in the legs of some Rhodian carrying a tray of drinks. Between his crash and the outcry from the roulette players, I got the pirate's attention. I held the lightsaber before me in such a way that its harsh light deepened the shadows within my hood. This is no more your sanctuary. This is no more a place where chance holds sway. Doom has come to Corcus, and if you stay, your only safe bet is on death. With that, I walked to a door in the exterior wall, slashed it open and let rain slant in. Lightning struck and thunder blasted it as I stepped through into the night. Well, it did at least for most of the humans I could reach. And then I was gone, except for their nightmares. And the bounty climbed to 100,000 credits. The weakness of my approach became very apparent to me and unfortunately Shala the Hutt. While my tactics were being very effective, and desertion was beginning to nibble away at the Invid ranks, the fact that I had not killed anyone had begun to work against me. I was dealing with thoroughly and completely ruthless individuals who would kill someone in a fight over scraps from a garbage heap. Since their lives were the only thing of value many of the Invids possessed, the fact that I wasn't killing applied a brake to the plummeting morale and even allowed for a rebound. Shala let it be known that he had a method for dealing with the Jedi, but he kept it under wraps. His warehouse became a fortress where even Tavira's future consort was not allowed to visit. He sent his various hench creatures out to terrorize parts of town outside the aviary and started delivering his own messages. His crimes against property escalated into robberies and simple assaults, with more and more hideous crimes clearly in the future. His actions were an open challenge to the Jedi, and even though I waylaid a couple of his raiding parties, he just made the following ones more powerful and sent them forth. Everything pointed toward a direct confrontation between us, which I knew would have to be at the warehouse. I snagged a Twi'lek associate of his, Shala's explosive specialist, a real nasty piece of work, and sent Shala the message that I would meet the Hutt at the warehouse. I didn't specify an exact time, but it was obvious that I would have to find him sooner rather than later. Eligos was dead set against my going. Surprise has been your ally and has allowed you to win through in situations where you should not have. Entering the Black Star Sanctuary was foolish because you'd not been there, but surprise got you through that. You surrender surprise here and it could kill you. I shook my head and clipped my lightsaber to my belt. I've still got a few surprises on my own, you know. And I've been in that warehouse. I've been around Shala, which is precisely why you should be more careful. You know his crew is mostly non-human, so your ability to affect their minds will be severely limited. It probably won't help you at all. Eligos frowned at me as he handed me my cloak. And it's fine for you to absorb a stray blaster bolt or two, but what if they open up on you with a dozen carbines? They won't. Look, I'll get a sense of the place before I go in. I'll know if he's got people waiting to jump me. And what if he has robotically controlled blasters so you won't have gunmen to pick out? I'll think of something. My answer rang hollow in my ears too, but it was the only one I had for him. I can't not face him, Eligos. If I do nothing, he wins, and a lot of people get hurt. I lose my chance to destroy the Invids. If you die, the same thing happens. I have no choice, I shrugged. I know this one will get ugly, and I'm fairly certain someone's going to die. I'll just have to make sure those who die are those who deserve to die. DK mentioned to me that Eligos is like Corrin's Alfred, and that's certainly true, especially since he's sort of being like Batman here now that I think about it. He's using the image of the Jedi, sort of like the way Batman uses the image of the Bat to, terrorize the scum of the criminals or whatever. I left my hotel unseen and stalked through darkened streets I found remarkably free of life, at least the Sapiens variety. Word had clearly leaked out that the Jedi had agreed to accept Shala's challenge. Since the two of us were likely to the most hated individuals on the planet, no one wanted to get in the way of our confrontation. The warehouse looked no different than it had before, save the side door was open and no light bled out into the night. I extended my senses toward it, letting the force flood through me, and picked out only a half-dozen large life forms, including Shala on his dais. The others remained hidden deep in the warrens surrounding the central pit. Their nervousness shone like a beacon, but I found Shala frighteningly calm. He was just waiting for me, so I deigned to keep him waiting no longer. I entered the warehouse through the open door and was not surprised when it closed behind me. I made my way quickly through the tangled trail of debris to the central amphitheater, threading a path through the chemical drums and twisted piles of metal. When I reached the warehouse's center, I saw a single light on, shining down on Shala and the 3PO droid translator. I slowly stalked down into the amphitheater bowl and stopped 2 meters away from the hut. I threw back the wings of my cloak and brought my lightsaber into a double-handed grip, but I did not turn it on. Shala muttered something, and the droid translated. The great glabrous Shala the Hutt bids you welcome. He instructs you to lay down your weapon and surrender to him, or you will pay a most fearful price. I thumbed my lightsaber on and pointed it up at him. Tell Shala I have all the credits I need to pay his price right here. Where would he like them deposited? The Hutt laughed, which was not the sort of warm, friendly sound one usually associated with laughter. His shoulders bounced, his fat bounced more, and a greenish foam crested the lower lip of his mouth and cascaded down his chin. The sound, however, that was even uglier. As it trailed to a wheeze, I heard a click and saw the Hutt raise his right hand. In it he had a remote with a big red button held down by his thumb. The droid spoke again. Shala asked me to inform you. This is a dead Hutt switch that will set off a variety of explosives here. He says that he has enough explosives here to destroy everything for a kilometer around us. If you do not surrender, many innocent people will die. All around us I saw little red lights come on and begin to blink, making me groan inwardly. In the light from above I caught enough detail, cross-hatched panels curving inward with a red light blinking on top, to know I was looking at Mare Sun Munitions LX-1 laser flechette mines, all pointed in my direction. When detonated, the panels would absorb the energy from the explosives, and the laser diodes would spray out clouds of laser bolts. To complicate matters, the mines usually had a 3-meter backblast of pure explosive fire, which would feed into the chemical drums I passed on my way in. That would trigger subsidiary explosions that would make quite a mess. Based on the drums I saw and what I knew of the mines, there wasn't really as much explosive power here as Shala said there was. Either he is lying, or... I glanced up and above the spotlight and caught the blinking of another LX-1. Or he was told things are a lot different than they are. Here at Stupidity Central we'll be vaped and the neighborhood will get quaked, but we're not talking square kilometers of wastage. I shook my head. Your Twi'lek set all of this up for you? The Hutt mumbled. Master Shala says he is most pleased with Rash Talak's work. Me? I'd want a refund. I smiled up Shala and gave him a cold laugh of my own. You've made 2 mistakes, Shala. 1, you're at ground zero yourself. 2, you think I can't stop you. I rotated my right wrist, twisting the throttle control up, and whipped the lightsaber around in a slash aimed to slice the dead Hutt switch in 2. With the twist, I turned the lightsaber's emerald out of the way and brought the diamond into line with the Durant fire beam. This extended the blade from 133 centimeters to 300, narrowing it, but bringing the Hutt's hand easily into striking range. Quick flick of the wrist, cleave the control in 2, and the day would be saved. That would be the easy way. Easy is not for a Jedi. With a puff of smoke, the lightsaber's blade sputtered and died. I remember the look of surprise on Shala's face. I'm pretty certain it came from watching the lightsaber blade grow out at him, but I'm not wholly convinced of that. I think, though, the horror that tinged his expression, that came from the realization that in his surprise, he'd dropped the remote. Rash Talak, in addition to wanting to replace Shala, was a virtuoso with explosives. The LX-1s went off in sequence, not all at once, washing the central area with wave after wave of laser flechettes. Each blast scoured the center of the warehouse from a different angle, guaranteeing that no unexploded mines would be hit, but adding laser fire to the chemical fires and exploding drums. And he even saved the blast from above for last, maximizing the chances that Shala would live long enough to know he had been betrayed. Had Rash Talak gone for quantity instead of quality, I too would have been reduced to a greasy, steaming stain on the Duracrete. I knew from the second I saw the remote fall, I had only one chance of survival, and only one chance to try to contain the damage. I sank within myself, touched the force, started it flowing, and sucked in every stray erg being sprayed on my direction. I felt sting after sting, as if I were sliding through a sarlacc's gullet, and it felt as if I were descending into a black pit of pain. I directed some of the force to help me blunt the pain, but that made it much more difficult to hold on to all of the power I was absorbing. I knew I couldn't hang on to it for long, and I knew I needed to use it to contain the explosion's deadly force. As I had done in the grotto to save Tion, I channeled all of it into telekinesis and raised my left hand. I twisted my wrist, starting the energy swirling into a vortex. I could feel the air begin to whirl around me, tightening, quickening. Flames from the chemical fires leaped toward the center of the room, spinning themselves into the vortex. Loose debris, flaming bits of duraplast, and rattling, clattering pieces of scrap metal flew into the air, filling the fiery cyclone with dark specks. I pushed and drove the vortex up and out through the roof, enlarging the hole the last mine had already opened. Chemical drums sailed up, exploding as they went, pulsing green and purple fire through the rising funnel. Flames wreathed me, and I sucked their heat in, then vented it back out, up and out, building the firestorm's strength until it ripped the warehouse's roof right off and crumbled it like a discarded piece of flimmoplast. The warehouse's doors banged open, then ripped free and flew like Sebek cards into the maelstrom. The warehouse's viewports imploded as air rushed in to feed the firestorm. I no longer needed to push. It had become a thing of its own, almost living, certainly breathing. I felt it tug at me, but the energy it fed me kept me rooted in place. I reached out with my mind, pitching up into the column of fire the last several unexploded chemical drums, watched them blossom brilliantly, then smiled. The explosion had been contained, drawn inward. Through the warehouse's corrugated metal walls glowed dully from the heat. They had not buckled. The tremors from the explosions had rippled out through the ground, but beyond that, and the fiery spear thrust into the sky, only the warehouse would be damaged by the hut's death trap. I felt the firestorm's power begin to wane, and I knew things were almost over, but I still had lots of energy left in me that I had to vent somehow. I looked up and allowed my smile to broaden. Everyone knows the Jedi came here to die. Let's show them he did no such thing. I expanded my sphere of responsibility and touched every mind I could find. Into them I projected a simple vision, one that would terrify many and reassure others. I let them see the shaft of fire stabbing up into the sky, and at its bottom was the hilt of a lightsaber. A giant figure of a man, clad in green and black, rose up through the black smoke. Then the fire vanished as he switched his lightsaber off. He faded back into the smoke and was no more. I opened my eyes and nodded as I surveyed the destruction. Shala had set a trap, and in turn had been trapped himself. I should have died, but I survived. Survived in a way that Cornhorn of Corsac could never have managed. I had survived. No, I had won. Shala's spectacular defeat would certainly crack the resolve of the other groups. A push here, a nudge there, and they would fall. I hooked my lightsaber on my belt, then looked down when I heard it clunk on the Duracrete. It lay there on a fire-blackened floor when it should have been on my hip, and it wasn't because I didn't have a belt to clip it to. While the Force allowed me to absorb energy and avoided being hurt by it, and lightsabers were notoriously durable, apparently my cloak and uniform were not. It was at this point when I realized that I was naked that the first wave of exhaustion hit me, and I began to notice other things. The imploding viewports had shattered into tiny little transparent steel fragments that had scourged me. I was bleeding from dozens of little cuts, including one across my nose and another somewhere in my scalp. I knew a simple Jedi healing technique could seal them and accelerate healing, but I found I was having trouble concentrating. Fatigue dragged at me, and I staggered back to sag against one of the amphitheater's walls. In doing all I'd done, I must have burned off most of my personal Force reservoir. I couldn't use it to link myself to the Force, to refresh myself. I was alone and tired, not thinking particularly sharply. But I knew one thing. If I stayed where I was, I'd be found, and found out. The Jedi clearly survived the battle at Shala, but there was no way Genos Sedanian could have. I scooped up my lightsaber and ran out of the warehouse. I headed north, at least I think it was north. I kept with the way the night breeze was blowing most of the smoke, allowing it to cover me. From there I moved into the shadows and alleys, keeping low, watching carefully. I know a chunk of my feeling exposed came from my being naked, but a bigger piece came from my inability to touch the Force. With it to armor me, I could have pranced naked through the streets and no one would have given me a second glance. Now I was a naked guy with a lightsaber, which was bound to be seen as peculiar to even the most jaded eye in Corcus. I thought I had figured out where I was. I ran across the street and paused in the shadow of a storefront to confirm my bearings. Then I heard a lock click and the door begin to open outward. Even though the store had been long closed, employees had been working inside. As they came out, I yelped and darted around the corner into an alley, which turned out to be a dead end. My dead end. And the single alley in Varna that had a working light in it. The two women came around the corner and stared at me. I stared back at them. They began to giggle and point. I leaned against a wall and tried to conceal my lightsaber behind my thigh. As they began to whisper to each other, I looked away, hoping to hide my face so they couldn't identify me. It wouldn't take them any time to determine a man with a lightsaber had to be the hunted Jedi, and 100,000 credits, even split between them, would be enough to get them off Corcus and buy them a life of luxury in any of a dozen other worlds. I was done. It was over. Tavira would learn who I was, from me or from Elagos. Oh, Elagos, what have I done to you? She'll destroy Carolit. Once she had taken care of his world, she would have had Mirax killed, probably before my eyes. Then she would destroy me. I had succeeded in saving the people near the warehouse, but in doing so I had killed those I held most dear. Then I felt strong hands on my shoulders. A blanket settled about me, and I was turned away from the wall. I looked up. Elagos? There you are, his rich voice boomed through the alley. Drunk. Again, he scolded. He reached down and plucked the lightsaber from my right hand. No, Elagos. Even though I tried to take it back, he raised the purloined weapon high and glared down at me. So where is it? Where is the rest of your speeder bike? The women at the alley mouth burst out laughing. Clutching their sides, they reeled away and into the street. They glanced back, sharp laughter ringing out again and again as they thought about a naked, drunken pirate who had demolished a speeder bike and only had the throttle assembly to show for it. My knees gave way, but Elagos held me up. Thanks. You are more than welcome. I swallowed hard, my throat parched. How did you find me? Your vision touched me, and I assumed you might be in trouble. He smiled and tapped his nose with a finger. A Tegan silk, of which your clothes were made, has a distinctive scent when burned. Right now you stink of it. Oh, sorry. I'll endure it, for as long as it takes for us to get back home. The Kamasi started walking me back toward the hotel, and I wouldn't fear for discovery, at least not this evening. A lot of people saw a vision they hoped never to see tonight, and are even now contemplating whether or not they want to stay in a place where they might get to see it again. I gave him a smile. And you don't mean those two women, right? Not exclusively, no. The Kamasi chuckled lightly. Your work is done for this night, but its repercussions will go on for a long time. And that's the end of that chapter. And that was a long episode. Again, we're getting very close to the end. I really like this section of the book, like I said, of him going out and basically him being a superhero at night and him planning all this stuff. I really enjoyed this part. But I will see you next time for the next part of I, Jedi.